Welcome to the Miami-Dade College Journalism Speaker Series. I'm Manolo Barco, your host. Joining us today is the Nuevo Herald Managing Editor, Nancy San Martin. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Nancy, can you start off talking to us a little bit about your experiences? I know you worked at the Dallas Morning News, at the Miami Herald, the Sun Sentinel. Talk to us a little bit about some of your experience and the time that you've spent in the field.
Well, I actually started my career in Miami-Dade, the Wilson campus, when I worked for the student newspaper. That's really what ignited my fire in terms of journalism. And from there I got an internship at the Miami Herald and started working with the Neighbors edition there, which was Community Newsroom, a tab, which we still have. And that was kind of like the boot camp for young upcoming journalists. So after I graduated, I got hired and I spent a few years at the Miami Herald, and then a job opened up at the Sun Sentinel. And that was a really great experience for me. It's where I was able to carve a path toward foreign corresponding, which is what I wanted to do. It was my first foreign trip to Haiti and also to Cuba. And from there, I went to the Dallas Morning News. I was based in El Paso, covering the border for the newspaper, which was probably one of the best experiences in terms of journalism because it was very free-flowing. I mean, basically, I kind of went out and looked for stories and pitched them and was able to do a lot of interesting regular feature stories to in-depth investigative type pieces on in Juarez, Mexico. And then I thought I was as far away from the Herald as possible. I thought I was like, gone. And at some point after the Elian Gonzalez saga, which I had come back to Miami to cover for the Dallas Morning News, the Miami Herald kind of called me back and said, it's time to come home, basically. So here I am, and Miami Herald is my home. And then now with El Nuevo Herald as managing editor there.
Talk to us a little bit about some of the more impactful stories you've done and the reach that some of those stories have gotten.
Well, there's been a lot, right? So probably the most memorable for me was, of course, my first foreign experiences. One was Cuba, covering a humanitarian flotilla that left from Key West to Cuba. And it was my first trip to Cuba, and I went on a boat, and I will never do that again. It was supposed to be an 8-hour trip. It turned into a 38-hour trip.
Oh, wow.
The boat's motor died. Long story short, we ended up having to be hauled in by the Cuban Coast Guard. Nonetheless, it was an amazing experience once we got on the ground, being in Cuba for the first time, having a Cuban father, so obviously having that connection to the island, even though I'd never been there, was a tremendous experience. And then Haiti, of course, is always a fascinating place. That too was a pretty dramatic experience for me because my first trip was to actually cover a boat that had sank and a bunch of migrants had died. So it was trying to piece together that journey. So that was truly an emotional experience. And I've been to Haiti numerous times, and it's always a place that, you're there and it's frustrating and fascinating and invigorating. And you think you want to leave, and then you leave, and you can't wait to get back there. So Haiti also is very familiar to me and a place that I'm very comfortable in. There have been so many stories. I mean, Afghanistan was an incredible experience. Mexico, doing stories there from cultural pieces to the maquiladoras to, a string of deaths, predominantly involving women who were left for dead across the desert. So those are...
And those are all major news stories. Talk to us a little bit about, for our audience, for young journalists, obviously they're not going to start covering those kinds of things. how do you prepare? How do you get your feet wet? How do you start getting this training to get up to that level to be able to cover things like that?
Well, for me, the most important thing is making contacts, right? So for me, it was getting involved with the National Association of Hispanic Journalists as a college student. They had a convention in Miami, and that's how I got involved, thanks to my former professor, which we all knew as Mr. Q, your predecessor. And I volunteered to stuff bags at the convention, and that's how I started to make contacts with other journalists and kind of get a feel for, you know, how do I get in? I mean, it's a tough industry to break into, unless you know someone. I mean, that's the reality, like any interest in any industry. So making contacts, going to conventions, going to workshops, making your presence known, you know, knocking on doors. Young journalists always ask me, like, how do they pitch a story? How do they get their story published? And my advice is always that it's easier to get a finished product in rather than an idea. Selling an idea is a difficult thing. So, you know, if you come across a journalist and it's someone that's, you know, you find interesting and you want to make contact with, don't be shy about, you know, emailing, calling, and, you know, being persistent.
And then NHJ is here in Miami this year again.
That
so
is
there's
true.
that opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. They'll be here again in July, mid-July. So that would be a good opportunity for any students. You know, go online, check and see if there's any volunteer opportunities. Check with your advisors to see if there's a way to attend. And it's a good way to get to network, but also to learn the latest in terms of the skills that we're looking for in the newsrooms.
Talk to me a little about the importance of working for either your high school paper or your college paper. You talked about Q, and someone that I admire a lot. What he did here is unprecedented. Talk to me a little bit about getting that first experience in the high school, college setting, and why that's important, and also about the time here with Q and what he did. What he did to make this place so great.
Well, I did not work on the high school newspaper. I didn't know I wanted to be a journalist. I kind of fell into it in Miami-Dade. And the way that happened, I was in my advisor's class, in my, my English teacher's class, going over an essay or something. Miss Teeny was her name. And Mr. Quevedo, Mr. Q, his office was across from hers, and he comes barging in saying, you know, I need writers. Do you know any writers? And the professor said, yeah, she's sitting right here. And I'm like, I don't think so, because I had no idea that what I wanted to do. And she kept pestering me so much to try it out that I finally did. And I fell in love after my first story. And that was in large part to Mr. Q and his level of enthusiasm and his positive reinforcement, and it was fun. I mean, to get paid to do something that you're having fun doing is a unique experience. So I figured, okay, this is not a bad deal, and I always enjoyed writing, but being involved with your campus paper, whether it's high school or college, is very important.
We're going to take a momentary break, but we'll be right back with Nancy San Martin.
Start your story at MDC. Be analytical. Be imaginative. Be a rising star. Be bold. Be connected. Be the solution. Be ready. What's your story? Be the best. Be you. Be MDC.
Welcome back to the Miami-Dade College Journalism Speaker Series. Our guest here is Nancy San Martin. Nancy, before the break, you were talking a little bit about Jose Quevedo and the culture that he developed here at Miami-Dade College with the student newspapers, the Metropolis, I'm sorry, the Downtowner, which he turned into the Metropolis, and the Falcon Times at North Campus. Talk to us a little bit more about the culture that he developed and what he made so enticing to come to that newsroom and develop the people that he did.
I think what made him special and what made the program special, for us it was the Metropolis at the Wolfson campus, is that he took it very seriously. So we weren't doing just puff pieces. We were doing real community journalism. And we would have meetings every day to go over story ideas. And we uncovered things that were happening, whether it was at the college or in downtown, that actually made news. And I think that's what it was, that the passion was married to serious journalism. So yes, it was fun, and there were some stories that were quirky, but by and large, we did real journalism, and he was very critical in terms of demanding quality content. We couldn't just turn it in and have it published. It would go through a serious editing process, and it wasn't published until the article was to the level that it needed to be. And he also was very good about introducing us to professionals and having us participate in workshops and conferences, etc. So I think that's why it worked so well and why so many of us were attracted.
So fast forward to current day, now you oversee the operation of El Nuevo Herald. Did you in your wildest dreams ever think that when you were a college student that, hey, one day I'm going to be the top executive at one of the local papers, one of my hometown papers?
No. I was one of those who, always thought editors were the enemy, right? We, the journalists, the writers and the photographers know it all, and the editors are only there to make your life miserable. I mean, back then that was my thing. It was not something that I wanted to, that I set out to do. I was very lucky. It's kind of happened that I've been able to climb the ladder. But no, it was not something that I imagined at a young age that I'd be doing.
How difficult is going from being a reporter to now you're managing people, you're managing this whole, the whole newsroom? How difficult and how different is it to, those two different jobs? It's
two different worlds.
Yeah.
So when I started editing, I've always maintained a little bit of writing in between because it's what I love most is writing and the creative process. But what I found is when I started editing is that there's a different part of your brain that clicks in that's also very creative. The ability to help other people make their copy better, or expand on an idea, or go from one story to an investigation is thrilling. You get a lot of satisfaction in that. In terms of running a newsroom, it's completely different, right? Because as a journalist, you've got your story and your sources or your characters, and that's it. Running a newsroom, you're dealing with other people who have that world that you have to juggle and be present in all those different elements of storytelling. Plus you're dealing with, now we're dealing with still photography and video and audio, and I'm doing it in 2 languages, which is a added challenge, correct.
So talk to us a little bit about that. So when you were named the managing editor of Nuevo, Mindy Marquez mentioned that you were at the forefront of the digital newsroom there at the Herald. You were a big part of that. How different is that world compared to, maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and the world that we live in, the opportunities that these young people have now because of that?
I went on a fellowship in 2005. I was a Neiman Fellow. Prior to that, we had just begun experimenting with video in terms of a platform, a storytelling platform. I was not a proponent of video before I went to the Neiman Fellowship. And what happened while I was away is that I learned the beauty of storytelling through images, moving images. I've always been a big proponent of still photography, and I'm still, as you know, I'm married to a photographer.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
That kind of makes me a little biased. I still believe that one still image is more powerful, often, than an entire documentary. Nonetheless, it's a very valuable tool for storytelling that, done right, can be very powerful. So when I came back to the Miami Herald after that, I was charged with coming up with our social media strategy, because by then we had, you know, the internet had been at the height. We were right at the height of evolution in terms of the industry. So I was charged with doing that and trying to come up with some social media do's and don'ts.
Perfect. We're going to take another break and we'll return momentarily.
Start your story at MDC. Be analytical. Be imaginative. Be a rising star. Be bold. Be connected. Be the solution. Be ready. What's your story? Be the best. Be you. Be MDC.
Welcome back. We're here with Nancy Sammartino of Nuevo Herald today. Nancy, talk to us a little bit about the Emmys you won. That has to be a little bit of a different world for you as well. In 2011 and 14, you won 2 Emmys. Talk to us about what these documentaries were about and why they're important in today's news media.
Yes, a completely different world.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one was out of Haiti. And the way that happened was the images were coming in after the earthquake in Haiti, which, as you know, was completely devastating and a lot of deaths. And as the images started to come into the newsroom, where we saw bodies piled up and you know, the amount of devastation, the buildings crumbled and just beyond belief. I was sitting in the newsroom collecting that material because there was not a way to transmit. So a lot of the stuff was coming in via text and emails, mostly via text, and helping put together stories so we could get them out as quickly as possible. Our executive editor at that time, Anders Gyllenhaal, I remember he came out and he said, "We need to do something more with this. We need to do a documentary." And I looked at him like, okay. He said, no, we need to do a documentary. You got to do it. So I was stunned because I've never done film. I didn't even know where to begin. So luckily, I knew a independent filmmaker, Joe Cardona, who has done many films here in Miami. And I called him and asked him if he'd be willing to help out with this. And that's how we set about doing our first documentary. And it was basically a crew of 3. So it was myself, Jose Iglesias, and Joe Cardona, who was basically helping. He was directing while we were producing. So we went to Haiti. We spent a year collecting, the footage and using a lot of these still images and a lot of the work that the entire staff had been doing throughout the year as we documented this. But it was funny because we'd go into Haiti and you'd have the TV crews, you know, the large networks with basically a busload of assistants and photographers and cameras, and it was just, you know, me carrying the mic and one photographer, one videographer, and that was it. It was probably the toughest assignment I've ever had.
Oh, well.
Not only because of the story, but because I was clueless. I had no idea how to put together a story in this form. It was completely new. It was called New Bouquet. It's called New Bouquet. It's still available online. And feature-length documentary that was broadcast nationally.
That's fantastic. Can you talk to us a little bit about, okay, so a lot of the Herald and the Nuevo Herald are kind of an anomaly in the news media. You don't have a lot of Hispanics, there's not a lot of diversity, and particularly women who are in top executive positions. Herald has Mindy Marquez, they have you at El Nuevo. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of having those strong role models for young Hispanics and particularly young Latinas.
Well, the Miami Herald also always has, not always, but has always led the industry, I believe, in terms of diversity. I think that we're truly reflective of the community that we serve. So that is first and foremost the reason why it's important, because if you're going to be covering a community, your newsroom ought to look like the community that you cover. And that includes you know, Hispanics, African Americans, whites, you know, Latinas, Latinos. Why it's important? Because we represent, we help empathize with issues of concern in terms of the communities that we cover. It is unique. The current leadership is unique in terms of mainstream media. We're extremely proud of that. And our publisher also is a Hispanic female. So we're extremely proud of that, but it happened because certainly for my executive editor, it's the right choice. The leadership is there. It's not because we're women that we're in that position, but because we have the skills to do it.
And then I'll end with this question. It's more for young people. What do you look for? What traits, what things do you look for in a young journalist, or when you're hiring journalists, not necessarily just young, when you're hiring journalists, what are some of the skills and traits that you look for and that are important for them to develop and to get better at?
For me, they have to have la chispa, the it factor. And it's hard to define, but you know what that means, right? That
Yes.
spark, the drive to do what needs to be done to get that story. I mean, being a journalist is not what you do as a profession, it's really who you are. And it has to be in your DNA, otherwise you're not going to succeed. And now more than ever, because of the demands that are out there for us to get, you know, to get it right. I mean, we're competing not just with other publications, but we're competing with anyone who publishes online, which includes non-journalists. So someone that has the ideas, the passion, the persistence, but also empathy. They have to have empathy. You can't just be aggressive. You need to be, you need to listen, you need to be able to document, you need to be able to capture the essence of a story by having those qualities, not just, you know, writing down
What someone says.
And then writing it up.
Well, Nancy, thank you for being our guest today, and we'll join you next time on the MDC Journalism Speaker Series.